So, as the steering committee got together several months ago to prepare for the conference this year, we were throwing out ideas as to what might be a good topics for people to hear about this year. And interestingly, nothing in traditional cardiovascular medicine came up on the topic list, which is interesting for the state of Minnesota to have that be the case. But it is the case, and there are a lot of other areas that, though, are of high interest, and you saw some of those already today. And we wanted to focus on the gastroenterology segment of the market today on our panel. And it is an investment area that has had some investments in it. In fact, if you look at all the sectors within gastroenterology, including obesity, including colonoscopy, and various other segments, it actually has had $500 million worth of investments in the last 5 to 6 years, which is quite significant. That said, the exit liquidity market has not been as dramatic as we would like to see, or the investors would like to see within the market, and we kind of want to explore some of the dynamics in the market as to why that is, whether it might be changing going forward, and things of that nature. So to that end, we did invite several panelists to join us today, so I wanted to go through ahead, have everyone introduce themselves and give a little bit of background about their experience in gastroenterology. And my co-chair here is Doug Kelly from Alloy, who is a longtime investor in BarX, which is a fantastic success story in this field. So I might start with Doug and have the panelists introduce themselves.
You got it? Oh, here we go. Great.
Oh.
Yes, my name is Doug Kelly. I'm venture capital with Alloy Ventures. We're managing about $1 billion of early stage fund out in California, doing half IT and half healthcare. We do medical devices, diagnostics, and gene sequencing, laboratory instrumentation, things like that. And I guess my relevance to the panel was that I was the Series A, I led the Series A for BarX. And at the time, it was just Bob Ganz and Brian Zellickson and some contractors at Stellar Tech and no employees. And we built a team around it, focused on clinical data, that would be important to a potential acquirer. I think it's an important lesson of BarX actually is that the clinical data is what made it so attractive to Covidien. We sold it to Covidien for $325 million up front, plus some milestones. They were pretty close to finishing. So great transaction, great interaction, and a lot of interesting lessons learned, which we'll get talking about here.
Great, appreciate it. So, and I'm Kathy Toon, Thomas McNerney and Partners. We are investors in a company called Thorax, which is a local company that's focused on reflux disease. They just have received PMA approval on their surgical implant product for reflux disease. They generated data from about a 100-patient study with 2-year follow-up, and the data were tremendously successful. The panel met in January, and then in what at least I believe to be quite a rapid turnaround, in 10 weeks, the FDA came back post the panel and approved the product. So now the company's in the launch phases of the product, and it's a very exciting time, obviously, for the company. And we can talk about that a little bit more as we go forward as well, because Bob Ganz, Dr. Ganz, was one of the PIs for that study as well. So I'll throw it to Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Ganz. I'm from Minneapolis. I'm a practicing gastroenterologist here. We did start BarX Medical, actually in my garage in Minnetonka, about 1999, 2000. It was a very successful venture for a lot of reasons. We learned a lot from the reflux devices that failed in the past. And I think those reflux devices failed for a number of reasons. One reason is they didn't work very well. But another reason they failed is because they weren't well studied. And as Doug mentioned, there wasn't good clinical data to back them up. We learned that lesson, and we really made a huge effort to do good clinical trials for BarX, and that made a difference. GI is a funny field. There's a lot of odd things about GI. You know, I was reading the New England Journal of Medicine last couple of weeks, because I like to read journals that are somewhat to the left of the New York Times. But I was reading the journal, and it was so interesting to see how different the GI space is from, like, say, cardiology. So there were 2 studies, cardiac studies in there, and there was a 1% difference between these, you know, the control and the device, or surgery and stenting. And a 1% difference, that's 1 in 100 patients, that's enough to make the New England Journal. And the reason is because cardiology is a really hard endpoint, you know, death. Most people think that's a reasonably hard endpoint. And GI, 1% to us is a joke. I mean, we're a soft specialty. We're a lifestyle specialty. Our patients don't die. They suffer, but they don't die. I mean, reflux is a serious disease, and it can be significant, and it can kill you, but it takes decades to kill you. You don't die playing tennis from reflux. And, you know, a 1% difference in gas, you know, unless you're my wife, it doesn't make a huge difference. But, you know, a 1% difference in constipation, diarrhea, you know, a 1% difference in reflux, I mean, come on. We don't do 1% differences in GI. So Barracks really needed good clinical data because we're a soft outcome specialty. And so I think that's one of the lessons of GIs. You really need strong clinical data because we don't have hard endpoints. The other thing that we found, and I actually knew this, but we're a really odd specialty because most of our time and most of our revenue comes from doing a single screening procedure, colonoscopy, which is a really odd thing. So we generally take care of people, we're gastroenterologists, we generally take care of people who have no GI disease. I mean, think about that. 70% of my revenue comes from taking care of patients who have no GI disease, or healthy people. And they come in for a screening colonoscopy. And they come in for an hour, and I never see them again. Or I don't see them for 10 years. I mean, that's really weird. It's so weird that I actually hate to talk about it publicly. But we make so much money from doing that one screening procedure that not completely, but to a large extent, we're kind of disinterested in doing things that are complicated or tough or might hurt people. Because I can come in at 7:30 and I could do 15 columns and I could go home at 4:30 and I can make it to my kid's soccer game and I make a damn good living taking care of people with no disease. And so a device in GI, it has to be safe. It has to be beyond safe because gastroenterologists will not tolerate any risk at all. It has to be a zero-risk device. It has to fit into a 30-minute time window because that's what I can do my colons in. It has to be at least reasonably as lucrative as doing screening colons. And it's got to be something that doesn't take me out of my ambulatory surgery center a lot because that takes me away from my revenue source. So in many ways, GI is a really, really different specialty. And I think we learned a lot of those lessons at Barracks. We made the device idiot-proof, safe. I mean, you couldn't possibly screw it up. And we learned that from the reflux devices. There was no choice for the physicians. There was no power setting to do. All they could do was push a button. And for people who do screening colonoscopy all day, pushing a button was okay. It was safe, it was easy, there was no decision making. It was very precise, and we studied it to the point where we ended up with 70 peer-reviewed publications. And I can tell you, we've treated 110,000 patients. We don't have a single death, which is amazing. It's more dangerous driving to the endoscopy center than it is having the procedure. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, all right, thanks, Bob. So next up is Mike Allen, and Mike is the CEO of a company called Xlumena, which is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I may very well be, trying to take some gastroenterology-related surgical techniques and transform them into endoscopic techniques so that you can actually get the patients out of the hospital sooner, et cetera, save money. So I'll throw it to you.
Unlike